still talking about football?
Yeah, football. NFC North.
Then let's talk football.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Headed North, an NFC North podcast, and I am your host, D-Tron. And I know it's probably been a couple of weeks since our last episode, but you may or may not be aware that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I took a couple days or weeks off because I needed to reset. Plus, I was waiting for the NFL schedule to get released so I could tell you all about what games I'm super excited about. So that's what today's show is going to be about. We're not going to explore the whole schedule. I'm actually going to save that for our next episode where I'm going to tell you about opponents, and I'm also going to talk about my predictions for the upcoming year. But for today's show, we're going to touch on a couple of topics. The first is going to be rookie contracts. Now, I know it's been a few weeks since the draft happened, and you probably don't care much about what people are getting paid, but I'm looking at pockets because there was a really cool article that was written by Kurt Badenhausen on Sportico. And it talks about bonuses being up for the draftees. It talks about some of the history and why there is a cap on what rookies can be paid. And so I wanted to explore what each of the first round rookies for the four teams are going to receive in salary and bonuses. And then I'm also going to tell you about a couple of games. So I'm going to tell you what is the season opener for each team. We're going to talk about what I think is the most anticipated game of the year, and then what is the most unique game on each of their schedules. So we're going to look at 3 different games for all 4 teams and then talk about some rookie contracts. But before we do that, I want to make sure to kick it over to my sponsor. That way they can tell you about their stuff. This week's episode is sponsored by OffRackShop.com. OffRackShop.com is an online thrift store. They sell men's and women's clothing, shoes, accessories, and more. So if you haven't already, check out our description. There's a code for 15% off your next purchase at OffRackShop.com. All right, we are going to get the show kicked off, and we are starting with the Minnesota Vikings. So I said that we were going to talk about contracts. So Minnesota took 2 folks in the first round. You're already probably familiar with that if you're a Vikings fan or a casual watcher of the NFC North. So they took J.J. McCarthy at 10th, and then they took Dallas Turner out of Alabama at 17. So again, I mentioned that there is some caps for the different contract that you can get if you're a first round player. Well, all of the draftees, and most of that, based on the article that I read from Kurt, derived from that 2009 and 2010 season where Matthew Stafford and Sam Bradford got paid ridiculous amounts of money. And so after that, they start putting caps in place for what each draft class can get. And there was some changes that happened during the COVID years, but ultimately just know that there is a max amount that you can give a draftee out of the first round. So McCarthy at 10 is getting $21.9 million total, with $12.7 million at signing. And then Dallas Turner is getting 15.8, and he again was taken at 17, and he's getting 8.3 at signing. So those are decent contracts, but you're talking about someone who is going to be in this contract for 4 years with a team option of 5, and there's really no restructuring that they can do of that deal. I know that's a ways away and probably not something that anybody, including JJ McCarthy, is worried about, but I just find it interesting that 10th overall, you're making 21, almost $22 million, but you're guaranteed almost 13. So that's pretty good money. So Minnesota's schedule, the season opener is against the New York Giants. I think that's perfect, because a new starting quarterback, rookie, getting his first go at playing in the league, needs a easy way to start. And there is no easier way to start than the New York Giants. And if I got any Giants fans listening, well, I'm sorry, but your team is not very good. And so this is the perfect game for Minnesota to start with. You get an early win, and now you got some momentum to carry into weeks 2, 3, and 4. And JJ McCarthy can kind of get the jitters out against a team that, again, shouldn't present him with that big of a challenge. My most anticipated game for the Minnesota Vikings, it's got to be week 4 at Green Bay. Now, week 4 at Green Bay, the Vikings are coming off of 2 home games They're going to play the 49ers and the Texans so 49ers in week 2, Texans in week 3. So coming into week 4, they just played 2 really good defenses, and now they got to go on the road and play an upstart, highly talented Green Bay team, which was not the team that we thought we would see before. Now they got to go into Lambeau and play them after, again, being at home, but playing 2 really tough defenses. So I'm interested to see how Minnesota bounces back after having to play some pretty tough competitions week 2 and 3, and then can go on the road and perform in Lambeau. And then the most unique game for the Minnesota Vikings, I've got week 5 versus the Jets. It's considered a home game, but it's in London. Yeah, I just don't know how they're going to travel, and if it's going to be one of those things that they respond well on the road, or, jet lag hits you, you got a young team, a young quarterback. This is his first time under international lights. It'll be the first time for a lot of those guys under international lights. To see how they're going to perform, I just think that it makes for some unique challenges, mostly around the traveling and getting there and getting acclimated thing. Moving on to Green Bay. So Green Bay took Jordan Morgan, 25th overall in the draft. So Jordan Morgan's making $14.2 million, and he's getting 7.1 at signing. That's just a check-in on where late first round talent for the Green Bay Packers is going to be making for their rookie contract. So for Green Bay, their season opener is against Philadelphia, and it's in Sao Paulo. Let me double check this because I wrote this down and I don't know if that's actually true. Let me make sure that I read this right. Week 1 of their season is against the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's in Sao Paulo, Brazil at Arena Corinthians. Whoa, you start in week 1 and you're considered the road team, but you're both on the road. I think this is the first game in Sao Paulo, Brazil that the NFL has had. This is going to be a major must-watch game. Philadelphia Eagle, we don't know what team they're going to be this year, but Green Bay is definitely on the up. If this is the introduction to international play in Brazil, this is going to be certainly one that's going to have some sparks, and I fully expect for Jordan Love to come out and show hey, this is my team. I'm running this division, and see if he can get a fresh start after falling a bit short in the playoffs last year. So that's a season opener. They're playing Philadelphia in Sao Paulo, Brazil at Arena Corinthians. The most anticipated game that I have down for Green Bay's schedule is week 9 at home versus Detroit. This is going to be the clash of the 2 top teams in the NFC North. Both of these teams went to the playoffs last year. Both of them have a fairly young team. They are really vying for who's going to own the top spot in the NFC North. And so this is going to be that clash that you've been waiting to see since last year. And see if they split wins again for this year, or if one team is going to be dominant versus the other. But I think these two will really set the tone for the division, and that's why I got it down as my most anticipated game for the Green Bay Packers. And then the most unique game, again, I think it's got to be the Philadelphia Eagles playing in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Sure, it's the season opener, but this is a major way to either start your season or stumble out of the blocks. This is going to be a great time for Green Bay to show folks on a national stage who they are. So I think it's certainly going to be the season opener because that's already scheduled, but it's probably the most unique game that I have on the schedule for the Green Bay Packers. So moving our big board down, we're going to get into Detroit. So Terrion Arnold, Terrion, I call him Terrion, I think. Sorry if I butcher your name. I'm going to learn how to pronounce it before the next show. Guaranteed. $14.3 million as a number 24 overall pick and getting 7.3 of that as a signing bonus. So getting into Detroit's schedule. Look, Detroit's season opener is going to be all kinds of fireworks. It's the LA Rams coming back to Ford Field again. Now, I don't think it has the same hype and anticipation that it did last year for the playoffs, because it was like vanquishing, the boss at the end of a board when you had to play Matthew Stafford to continue in the playoffs. But with that being said, The Lions still have a chip on their shoulder, and I'm certain Matthew Stafford does as well, about the trade and how it all worked out. And so this should certainly create some fire when it comes to getting a season kicked off in Detroit. Probably one of the most anticipated season openers in Detroit in 2 decades. It's that big. So this is going to be a really cool game to watch. I got the most anticipated game for Detroit this year on the road, week 6 against Dallas in a rematch of he reported eligible game. There is no way that there is not going to be some additional fire behind the Detroit Lions when they go to Dallas again in hopes of knocking off the Cowboys when they should have knocked them off last year based on that bogus call. I'm not going to get into that call, but you know and I know he reported as eligible, but whatever. It's going to be the rematch. So this is certainly going to be the most anticipated game that you could have for the Lions. That's my most anticipated game. And then I got the most unique game for the Detroit Lions is going to be week 17 at the 49ers. And I think it's the most unique game because at this point, a number of things could have happened. By week 17, divisions could be wrapped up, conferences could be wrapped up, or there could still be a whole lot in play for 2 teams that are expected to be at the top of their conference. So I got week 17 at the 49ers, one of only 3 outdoor games that the Lions will have to play this year, which certainly favors them. Jared Goff plays so much better on indoor games. I'm looking forward to that game in week 17 and what it might bring for potential for the NFC. And then moving down into the Chicago Bears. We all know Caleb was going first, so Caleb's going to make $39.5 million, but he's getting $25.5 of that at signing, so he is set pretty early. But also taken in the first round by the Chicago Bears was Rome Odunze. He's getting $22.7 million. He was drafted in the 9th spot of this year's draft, and he's going to be making $13.3 million at signing. So what's Chicago's schedule looking like? Well, I'll tell you. Their season opener is against the Tennessee Titans at home in Chicago. Again, similar to the Minnesota Vikings, this is a great way to get your schedule kicked off. A team that is not going to hopefully give you a whole bunch of problems. Someone you've got a pretty good shot at beating. And as a rookie quarterback coming into your first game, you get to play at home. This is perfect. You couldn't line this up any better unless you were playing, I don't know, the Arizona Cardinals. It just could have been no better opening game for Caleb Williams to come out and show what he has against a team that is pretty depleted, honestly. So, most anticipated game for the Chicago Bears has to be week 11 against the Green Bay Packers. This is the first divisional game that Chicago has in the Caleb Williams era. If his era is supposed to be anything like Chicago anticipates, this is going to be the start of a lot of clashes of NFC North teams. If that being the case, they are pretty deep in their schedule before they play a divisional opponent, which means they'll have some back-to-back divisional games in those last 6 weeks or 7 weeks of their season. But the first one is against Green Bay in week 11. And the most unique game that I have on Chicago's schedule is week 6 versus the Jaguars. It's considered a home game for Chicago, but they're playing in London, England at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. This is not really a home game for Chicago. I feel like the Jaguars play abroad all the time, and so I feel like they probably got the home field advantage here in London, but either way, it's considered a home game for Chicago, and they're going to be taking on the Jaguars in London week 6. So that is probably the most unique setup, similar to talking about the traveling to Brazil or the other game that's going to be in London for the Minnesota Vikings. It is pretty interesting to see how teams adjust to the travel there to the actual stadium. I know there were some complaints about some of the ground being tough and hard on some of the fields that they've played on. So it'll be interesting to see how the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams adapt to this game against the Jaguars week 6 in London. All right. That's it for the show. It's a pretty quick episode today. I'm just telling you about season opener, most anticipated game, unique game, and talking some contracts for rookies. But next week, or the next episode that I drop, I'm going to be telling you my predictions for this upcoming season. One of these teams is going to win more than 11 games. 3 of these teams are going to make the playoffs. Don't hold me to it, but next week I'll tell you all about it. As always, if you made it to this point, I really appreciate you listening to the show. Definitely give us a thumbs up, a like. Hit us up on social media. We are Headed North Podcast. And as always, if you come back next week, which I hope you do, make sure you got your bags packed because we are headed north. I'm D-Tron. Peace.
Are you still talking about football?
Yeah, Bubba Town, NFC, North.
Then let's talk football.